G'day guys, Stephen King here from the 21st Century Physio podcast. Thanks for tuning in. I've got a really exciting episode for you today. I've got Tim Rowland, physiotherapist and strength and conditioning coach. He's also the creator of the Physio Digest and collaborator on the Physio Network. We got some really great tips from Tim coming up in this episode around return to play, especially post ACL injury, how you can use social media in your practice and in your business to build your profile and build your business in physiotherapy. And we've also got his top tips on how you can become a 21st century physiotherapist. So let's not waste any time. Let's get straight into it and go and have a chat with Tim. All right, Tim, thanks for joining us on the 21st Century Physio podcast. Really excited to have you. You're someone that I've been following for a long time on social media, and you've definitely got a wealth of knowledge I think that our listeners will be really looking forward to hearing. So for those people who don't know you out there, Tim, do you just want to give them a little bit of a rundown about who you are and your background in physiotherapy?
Cool. Yeah, great to have me on board, Stephen. Pleasure to be here. So my name's Tim Rowland. I'm a physio and a strength and conditioning coach from Sydney, New South Wales. So I started off doing physiotherapy, and then I ended up doing a master's in high performance sports. So I sort of have a bit of a passion for strength and conditioning, and I like to implement that into some of my treatment philosophies as a physio too. So currently I work about 25 hours a week as a physio in a private practice in Sydney, and then I also work as a strength and conditioning coach with a few different rugby teams and also in a high school setting. So I like to sort of do different things with my days, and I also like to allow the physio to influence the S&C and the S&C to influence the physio, because I think there's a lot of overlap there. So yeah, I'm someone who does a lot of different things, and I really enjoy what I do, so it's great.
Fantastic, mate. And so what made you, you're a perennial student, similar to myself, what made you go back and do the Masters in high performance and go down that strength and conditioning pathway?
So probably a couple of factors. One of them being that during my own study of physiotherapy, I was rehabbing an ACL injury that I did to myself playing touch football.
Yep.
And obviously whilst doing the rehab, there's a big strength component to that, and sort of fell in love with the idea of training and rehabbing and getting stronger. And these are all things that I hadn't done that much of during school. So, learning about gym and how to best train, I became really fascinated by the process, and so that made me want to learn more and more, because I'm sort of the kind of person that doesn't like to do something without knowing all the science behind it. So learned about it, and I thought, you know what, I really enjoy this. I would love to do some work like this as well. So I'm going to follow it up with some postgraduate study after I finish physio. So I pretty much actually went straight into the Masters after finishing physio, and did physio work on the side while studying the Masters. So I mainly work with sports teams and did lots of casual physio work there while studying my Masters. And then I've sort of brought it all together now and are doing half. And so it sort of started from, personally an injury myself, and then learning about strength training and being really fascinated by it, and also just seeing the positive effects in myself. I thought, this is a great tool we can use as physios too. So yeah,
that's great. And so with that ACL injury yourself, do you think physios set you up well to manage your own ACL injury and ACL injuries once you graduated from university? Because I think some of the kind of misconceptions especially with the general public is that you go to physio to get exercises. And I know personally in my postgraduate master's degree that there wasn't a lot of rehabilitation or exercise prescription. I think we did 1 2-hour class of Pilates and maybe a 1-hour class of gym programming, and that was about it in that degree. What did you?
So that's a really interesting question. I've spoken about this at length before myself, and I think too, I agree with you. I only had one real unit in my physio degree on exercise prescription. So I feel like there definitely needs to be an interplay between a physio and someone who understands exercise prescription really well. Some physios do that well. Some have done further study, or they've really looked into it a lot. But I find that, to be honest, most physios are not good enough with the very end stage of rehab, where you've got to bridge someone back towards whatever sport they want to play. And physios, they have a really good knowledge of all the early stage stuff. They know how to improve range of movement, reduce pain, get muscle activation happening in the important muscles. But when it comes to actually getting proper strength training in, and power and plyometrics, change of direction, all that sort of stuff, I feel like the large majority of physios probably aren't well educated enough in that area. So I personally think the best model is to work with a physio and an S&C in that last sort of 3 months of your rehab. And you definitely still need to be checking in with your physio to check off all those clinical outcomes, but bouncing between two and finding a a pair of people that work well together. Or if you're lucky enough to find someone who can do both, which I hopefully am someone who can do a bit of both, that's obviously even more convenient. So it really does depend too on what sort of level the person needs to get back to. If they're just general pop who happen to do it in some traumatic event, for example, they may have been hit by a car or something, and they're only ever going to return to just normal day-to-day functions, you don't really need that proper end stage, power plyometric work, because it's just not what they need to get back to. But if you're working with an athlete that wants to get back to a field-based sport, you really should be working with someone who has great knowledge of what the demands of that sport are and how to prepare them to get back into that area. So yeah, it's an interesting one. I think some physios have a lot of pride out there, and they think that they can do the whole shebang and they know everything about power training, plyometrics and agility and change direction. But probably most physios aren't quite well educated enough in that area, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I think I definitely agree. Seeing the number of ACLs that we get in, people 6 to 12 months and still can't do a single leg squat or stand up from a bench on one leg. They're still lacking, 30 degrees of flexion. So there is some areas that I think physiotherapy can definitely improve. So I guess the injury yourself and this passion for performance, is that where you got your niche sort of around return to play and return to sport?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So obviously, if you combine physio with S&C, you land at a really nice part where return to play testing and that late stage rehab is probably where I would specialize in the most, because it's sort of an area where if you just study physio or just study S&C, you sort of know a bit about that area. But if you've done both, you can really see how that bridge between rehab and performance comes together. And that's an area that I've been able to apply with a lot of my athletes, and it's definitely an area I feel really confident in at the moment, for sure. That's
great. Now, I think it's an area that a lot of people don't do well, is that bridging that gap. So as you said, it's really important to have a good team around you. But, if you're a young physiotherapist, it can be a little bit disheartening. You sort of get these people to particular points and then you find, I'm just not sure what to do next. Like, what do you think, some areas or some things people could go away and look at or study to try and improve their knowledge of how they can bridge the gap between that, basic rehabilitation and that performance for the individual, whatever their needs, their wants or goals are, whether it is just going back to the day-to-day activities or, more importantly, I guess, some of your rugby players getting back out onto the field.
Yeah, I think as physios, it's really important to actually get some experience working with strength and conditioning coaches, or working with really, really good PTs even who have worked with athletes themselves. There are a few out there. So, there's plenty of places where athletes go to train. There's always higher level gyms around in any real area. So trying to scope around and find a performance-based gym in your area where you're working, and trying to reach out to them and say, hey, I'd like to learn a little bit more about strength training. I'm a physio. Could I come and watch? And they'll 9 times out of 10, they'll be more than happy to have you there, because they'll probably want to pick your brain a bit about rehab while you're there, and then you can pick theirs about S&C. So it would just be I think the best way to do it is just to reach out and try get some hands-on and just experience and watch and observe and ask questions, and that's probably the best way to do it. Obviously, there's a lot of resources out there these days too that you can read from. I think a really good website is Strength and Conditioning Research Review by Chris Beardsley. He does some really good stuff on his website, and there's so much information out there these days. So just trying to read and also get some hands-on with people in your local area who might be able to help you, and you might be able to help them, and there can be a bit of a reciprocal relationship, and you can even refer to each other that way too. You can get some referrals to physio and send some referrals over to him for late stage rehab, so him or her. So yeah, that's what I would recommend.
Fantastic. And so look, what's been your biggest influence, I guess, or maybe biggest changes to your practice as well that you've found sort of since you've gone down this strength and conditioning pathway from being a pure physiotherapist coming out of university?
Yeah, probably the biggest difference would just be in that I operate probably more closer to even an exercise physiologist might than a physio in my practice. So when I first graduated uni, as I said, we only had about 1 unit in exercise prescription. So it was what we were more sort of focusing on hands-on stuff, manual therapy, and then maybe a little bit of basic activation exercises, but nothing ever really in that proper strength training realm. So I really now am someone who operates a lot more like an EP and does a lot of exercise rehab, and only really hands-on work if the patient asks for it, or if they can't do too much physically because they're in too much pain. So yeah, that's probably been the biggest practice to my philosophy, in that I'm not your typical physio. I'm someone who really values exercise rehab. I can see the benefits and empowering the person to be able to do that themselves rather than needing to come back for hands-on work all the time. I think that has better lasting outcomes on the patient rather than feeling the need to come back to you all the time. So yeah, that's the biggest change in my model. I'm sort of an exercise physiologist with a physio background in a way. So yeah.
Fantastic. And I think I usually explain to my patients, what's the biggest bang for the buck that they can get from, spending that time within the session. And I totally agree with you. I think that, exercise, rehab and progression and, empowering the patient to take control of their own care is, a really important thing that, I think traditional, the physio model may have, missed out on and, missed that last little step in regards to returning to the sporting field, not empowering that patient and educating them about what they need to do and why it's important to continue to do it once they get back onto the sporting field too.
Yeah, 100% agree.
So going back to working with ACL injuries, what are some things you look at before someone returns to sport with an ACL injury?
Yeah, so it's a topic that I've done a lot of research into. As part of my Masters of High Performance Sport, I was with the Australian Sevens rugby team for my internship. Yep. And the project they wanted me to do was a literature review on the risk factors for both initial and secondary ACL injury. So obviously, in regards to your question, we're looking at more of the secondary risk factors. So there's a whole bunch of things we want to look at here. And the researchers, unfortunately, there's only a few really high quality prospective studies that have looked at how someone's performance is affected, whether they gotten injured in the end. And so some of the real key ones, probably the two biggest ones would be symmetry in quadricep strength between sides. So we're looking for at least 90% as a minimum. I preferably would want 100%. And then we're also looking at symmetry in hop testing. So we're talking single hop and stick and triple hop, and then timed hop over 6 meters, and also a bit of a zigzag crossover hop too. So we're looking for within 10% on left versus right in those tests too. If you can do both of those things, you're at such a better chance of not re-injuring compared to someone who can't. And unfortunately, there aren't that many people out there who are physios who are using those things as return to play testing. Sometimes because they don't have the facility to do that sort of thing, and often it's just sometimes because they're not aware of that. They think, okay, we got good bulk there, we got good range of movement. The Lockman's test looks good, and yeah, they seem confident, they're good to go. But no, we really need them to be able to do these things and have equal quadricep strength and have all this hopping ability. Another important one too would be, and this hasn't been exactly verified in the literature, but I like to look at single leg squat as a really good screen of dynamic valgus, and also see how that then applies into an actual change of direction task, and filming them and looking at both their left and their right sides, both in a predictable setting where they're going to decide which way they step, and also in a reactive way where you call out the last second, you might point one way, and you're filming them, and you just want to see whether they're really attacking it with 100% confidence on both sides, and also what their knee does during that change direction moment, whether it's collapsing in heavily on one side compared to the other. So these are things that I've sort of extrapolated from the literature that haven't been directly studied, but I think they have a lot of value in sort of looking at some of the kinematics during those tasks. But definitely two of the biggest ones are, as I said, the quadricep strength and the hopping performance. That needs to be tested, and if you're passing them, you're in a good spot. But I think it also pays to go beyond that and look at some tasks that might highlight any kinematic problems like a dynamic valgus too. So yeah.
Definitely, I wholly agree. And making sure that you look at it both in a controlled and fresh environment, but also in a fatigued environment as well, because there's been a lot of research coming out, I guess, showing that the effect of fatigue has on some of these tests, and that people can test really well, in a non-fatigue state, but as soon as you start to fatigue them, they can get up to 70% discrepancy side to side on some of those strength measurements. So I think that's a really, really important thing. And I like that you mentioned some of those uncontrolled environments in regards to landing and stuff. Do you look much at the impact of vision on some of these return to play measurements?
In a way I do. I would say that I don't necessarily always block out vision, but that whole cognitive processing is a huge part of someone's chance of doing an ACL. Like, there's been a lot of research that's showing that someone who has worse reaction time, lower processing speed, is actually more likely to do an ACL than someone who doesn't. Yep. So that's where it's so important that you do agility work on top of the change direction work. And some people might not know the difference between the two, but change of direction is where you can pre-plan what you're going to do, so you know which way you're going to move. Whereas agility involves a reaction to an external stimulus. So, for example, it might be a coach pointing a direction to run, or it might be a light going off on one way. That sort of works that whole cognitive realm where you've got to react to something, process it, and then it can really change how well you move if all this is going on in your head while you're stepping. So it's really important to work that in the last part of the rehab before you let someone go off and return to training, where in trainings they're versing each other, they're competing, and there's all this reactive stuff going on. If you haven't done any reactive stuff in a more closed environment first, then it's setting them up to fail, really. So there is definitely a large cognitive element. Vision is definitely part of that, but I feel like it's really the key reaction time and processing speed, and looking at information and trying to digest it and come up with an appropriate solution as quickly as possible.
Yep, I totally agree. So obviously the podcast is called the 21st Century Physio Podcast. So when I say 21st Century Physio, like what sort of skills and attributes do you think physiotherapy needs in the 21st century?
Yeah, good question. Obviously, physio's come a long way in some ways, and then not a long way in others. So for me, I think some of the key skills I believe work really well as a physio are first, your ability to listen and show that you actually care for the patient. I feel like a lot of physios, maybe have been in the game a little bit longer too, just, I've seen this injury before, yep, let's get to the point. Whereas if you're not showing that you actually care about the person and you're interested in what they have to say, they're not going to be on board with you either. And that's probably the most important thing you can do to bringing a patient back and not losing them, is to build that rapport and show them that you care, because they're going to come back. Even if you don't get your treatment perfect, but you get on well with them and you look like you care, they're more likely to come back, rather than absolutely nailing your treatment perfectly and you're barely sort of engaging with them. I feel like it's really important to just listen well and show that you care. And then secondly, having a wide toolbox of treatment. So you can't just be a physio that's, I'm only hands-on or I'm only exercise. There are time and place for every different type of treatment. Really, I like to be someone who is always, context matters. So there's never you should never do this or you should never do that. There's always a time and place for each treatment. So having different options for when different patient presentations come in is crucial. So you need to have a wide toolbox of treatment. So you just don't pigeonhole yourself into being that guy in that area. You just need to have a broad skill set and be able to know everything quite well, but know one thing very well. I think it's important in some way to have some kind of niche, so that people are drawn to you and people talk about you and like, oh, he's really good with this, because that's important. You don't want to sort of only be a jack of all trades, but you definitely need to have an understanding of everything and then sort of specialize in one particular area. And so for me, that would be the exercise rehab side of things.
Yeah. No, I definitely agree. I had a similar conversation with a couple of our new graduates who have started with this year yesterday, and they sort of about trying to find that area of specialty in that niche, because no one wants to see the generalist. They often want someone who has some experience and they feel confident can manage those particular conditions.
Definitely.
I think you brought up a really nice point about listening. You can't really give yourself a chance of helping someone if they're not coming back to see you, so that's also pretty important.
Yeah, 100%. Completely agree, mate.
So Tim, I'd class you as probably a modern day, 21st century physio, given that you not only have your physiotherapy background, which is starting to progress towards this return to sport and strength and conditioning base, but also you've got a massive following around the world in regards to your social media platforms. How do you think social media and building your reputation in the industries has affected your career, and how do you think others can sort of go about doing a similar type of thing?
Yeah, it's a really interesting one. You wouldn't be having this conversation more than 5 years ago. It's something that over the last 5 years has really, really taken off. For me, it's sort of the reason why I started it personally was I'm someone who has a bit of a natural love for educating. Both my parents are teachers, so I really enjoy tutoring and teaching and educating. It's sort of just in my blood a bit. And then I also just see a lot of information out there that is questionable, and I want to be someone who tries to not just complain about those things, but actually do something about it and put out good information too. So that's sort of how it all started for me. It actually started more with my performance side of things. Like I started my own performance page, and then from there I started writing about a bit of physio stuff as well as the strength and conditioning. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to start a separate page and do physio on one side and then the strength and conditioning on the other. So that's where Physio Digest started, which is my page that I've sort of built up at the moment. It's at about 36,000 likes, which is awesome. And I like to post roughly once a week, sometimes twice a week, and just share information that I've seen over the last 5 years that tends to stimulate a lot of discussion, and tend to be areas that there's a lot of confusion about, because I like to shed light on things that people don't quite know about, because I feel like that's the most useful thing you can do over social media. And just the way it is these days with where people's attentions are, it's always on social media. No one really watches ads on TV anymore. They get out their phone or they skip through it. No one really listens to the radio. They sort of put on their own music these days. So where a lot of people's attention are, and especially young people, anyone under 35 or so, they are on social media a lot of the time. I think I read a stat the other day that the average is about an hour and a half to 2 hours a day that people spend on social media, which is insane.
I'm surprised that's all. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's worse than that. But that's where I'm doing my business work, I guess, though. So I can't get in too much troubles. Maybe from the missus sometimes. But yeah, so it's a great way to reach a ton of really engaged people. And I found in physio and strength and conditioning, maybe compared to other areas, the audience you reach are so engaged and want to learn, and they want to talk about these things. Like I have friends in the business world or education sphere that have pages on similar amount of likes to me, and they can't believe the sort of engagement we get. And I feel like that's not a product necessarily of what I'm putting out, but more the fact that physios are really keen to learn sort of by nature. They want to engage in conversations. They want to learn. They want to read things. And so therefore you have a captive audience right there. It's just a matter of working out what you're going to talk about and working out how you're going to try to build it up to what it is. So for me, the best way was to sit back and watch other pages and watch other discussions for 2 or 3 years at least, and go, okay, this is what people like to learn about. This is what the topics people still don't know much about are on, and then start posting things, and hopefully you've built yourself personally a bit of an identity by involving yourself in discussions in the past. That way you can reach out to sort of groups that are on Facebook or other pages and say, hey, I've started a page. If you're happy to share some of my stuff, it would be awesome. And that's a real way to increase your amount of likes quite quickly. Otherwise, you can be putting out perfect content, but if no one knows about it at all, it will stay on, less than 1,000 likes for a long time. So just try to reach out to people and say, hey, I've started a page. Would you mind sharing something if you see it and you think it's decent content? And that way you can build your audience and just be regular, be consistent, have a bit of a brand. With Physio Digest, I tend to lean towards the exercise side of things a bit more, because that's who I am as a physio. So yeah, that's sort of how I've gone about things myself.
And it's a bit disheartening when you go and write a nice, long 2,000 or 3,000 word blog post and no one reads it. You check your website stats, and when you're starting out, there's nothing more disheartening than you see the hours that you put into this one post, and then for no one to read it. But I think the key is just being consistent with that stuff too. If you're 100%. Consistent for a long enough period of time and you build up a body of work like you've done, you start to get some really good traction, some really good following right around the world. So
100%.
That's the beauty. Now, tell us a little bit more about some of those myths that you talked about before. You sort of said there's some misconceptions and some myths that you sort of, like to address on your page. What are a couple of your favourite sort of misconceptions or myths in physiotherapy that you think need to address and maybe be put to bed a little bit?
Yeah, sure. There's a few out there. Probably one of the big ones I like to talk about is in sort of chronic low back pain conditions. There's a lot of physios that obsess over really, really specialized specific exercises for, the TA and the multifidus and all these really fancy exercises that, first of all, the patient will really struggle to do well because they're very, very hard to teach and very hard for them to have feedback for. When really, if it's like a chronic low back pain condition, there is so much more to it than just exercise in the first place. There might be, whenever something's lasted longer than 3 to 6 months or so, there's a huge psychological and psychosocial component to it as well. So the physio just looks at these tiny little specific exercises that the patient will struggle to feel and struggle to do, versus just promoting a more global approach of just being positive, moving in ways you enjoy, and staying active and doing maybe more full body training rather than just these really specific target exercises that don't have any evidence for them being more effective than more general exercise. So that's one that I feel like a lot of people obsess about a little bit. Another one is the fact that a lot of people still strongly believe that every manual therapy technique you do has highly specific, localized biomechanical effects, whereas we're sort of learning more now these days that a large reason why they work is these sort of more global neurophysiological effects that are modulating the nervous system hormones and things like that. So I feel like some people think, okay, I'm doing this on this person's back and I'm moving their L4, 5 up and down. And you chat to any surgeon who's done back surgery and they laugh in your face when you tell them you're actually moving that area because it's like 4 centimeters deep at least up below the paraspinal. So yeah, you've got to realize that whilst it's still effective, it's not necessarily working the way that you might think it is. So there are a couple of my ones that I tend to think about and talk about a bit for sure.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's some pretty very nice misconceptions, and something that we talk a lot about in our courses as well is some of those sort of misconceptions about the why behind what we're doing things. Look, I don't think we necessarily have all the answers yet to answer all the questions, but I think there are some neurophysiological, some hormonal models that maybe fit what we're doing a little bit better than maybe those typical structural and biomechanical models that we've
definitely
served the profession well for a while, but I think it's time that we start to evolve and we start to move on there.
Yeah, definitely.
So tell me a little bit about your new project, something that I'm really excited to be part of. So the Physio Network. So it's a collaboration with you and some other guys around the world. Do you want to let our listeners know? Because I think it's a really great initiative that you guys have created. It's helping to bring the latest research to people around the world.
Yeah, no, thanks, mate. No, it's it's Physio Network. Essentially, I connected with some guys who run some big pages as well. Trust Me, I'm a physiotherapist, Rethinking Physiotherapy and Physio Research. I'm sure a lot of your listeners will have heard of them. And I realised over the last sort of year or so that having contributed to a strength and conditioning research review myself and seeing the benefit in sort of digesting and breaking down the latest research and giving the practical applications of that research. And I thought, there's nothing really out there like that in physio at the moment. And I couldn't really believe it. I spent almost the whole day searching the internet, every corner of it, to try to find something that someone doing it well and asking around. And there wasn't really any answers at all. And I thought, this is a big gap in the market to help people keep up to date with the latest research. So I reached out to those 4 guys and I said, hey, we obviously can reach a lot of people and let a lot of people know about it. So let's come together and let's start a research review service for physios, where we essentially, what we've ended up doing is getting in great authors like yourself to pick one study each a month that they found interesting and they're passionate about, and to sort of summarize it, but also not to summarize it like the abstract, give you the limitations of the study to help you understand how to interpret and analyze research, but then also, most importantly, give you the clinical implications of that research and how it should affect your day-to-day practice. So essentially, we've got 12 articles a month that are picked by expert physios out there that summarize them and give them the clinical implications of those studies and really try to help you keep up to date with the research, because it's so hard as a practicing physio in a private practice that's busy, or in a hospital that's busy, to necessarily do all the reading you need. Whereas with this review, each study is analysed in about 700 words, so it's probably a 3 to 4 minute read, and you can read the whole 12 articles in less than an hour and sort of really keep up to date and on top of it with a lot of the research. So that's sort of what we've gone for with it.
I think it's awesome. As you said, there's nothing around giving those practical tips, that people can implement into their practice and start to change what they do, the very next day after reading them. So I think it's a really good initiative. I really hope it goes well and you guys, continue producing that for a long period of time. Because I think there's lots of people all around the world who could really, benefit from that. And as you said, just making some of the research more consumable and more accessible to people, it's only a good thing. It's only going to help the profession going forward.
No, I appreciate it. Thanks, Stephen.
All right. So before we finish up, what are your top 3 take-home points for physios of how they can, improve their practice, improve the profession, and bring themselves into the 21st century?
Cool. All right. So we'll start with one of the ones I spoke about before, the importance of listening and showing you care for the patient. Because, as I said, probably the most important factor on whether you retain patients is whether you can build that rapport. So your whole communication skills and your interpersonal skills and showing that you care are critical for patient retention, even more so than how perfect and how smooth your actual treatment is, in my opinion. That's number 1.
Yep.
Number 2, as I said before, have a good toolbox of treatments you can use. Don't be the guy that only does manual, the guy that only does even a specific type of manual therapy. There are people out there that do that. So don't pigeonhole yourself into one treatment only, because you're going to see a wide variety of patients, especially in that first 3 to 5 years where you're not the go-to guy for this. You're going to see people of all different types of backgrounds. So you need to have a wide toolbox and keep learning about different areas so that you can use whatever is appropriate for the patient. And then the third one, probably on theme with what we've talked about today, would be the benefit of social media, not only for building your own sort of, following or your own page, but as what I try to do as a physio for Physio Digest is allow people to read and learn online through social media. So use it as a learning tool. As much as you might by searching through journals, you can also use social media if you follow the right people and the right pages. Like when I go on Facebook these days, it's not to talk to my mates. It's literally to learn and to network with people. So don't underestimate the power of Facebook and Instagram for doing those sorts of things. You can really set up your feed to be a learning device, and I've called it in the past the online internship. And it's free, and you can chat to people, you can ask them questions, and a lot of the time they get back to you because they want to see people engage on their page, and you can learn from people who may have be a little bit more experienced in yourself. So yeah, they'd be my 3 tips.
Great. No, I think that's exactly what we're trying to do here at the 21st Century Physio Podcast. Start to bring, some of those practical tips and, in a short, convenient way that people can start to, improve their practice in a meaningful way, hopefully. So, Tim, awesome tips. Thank you very much for joining us today on the 21st Century Physio Podcast. And I look forward to hopefully be able to get you back again sometime soon. Talk a little bit more about some of those areas of interest, in particular maybe that return to play a little bit more too.
Yeah, sounds great, Stephen. It was a pleasure to be on. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Tim.
See you later.